Welcome. So in this tutorial, we're going to go over how to create sprite sheet animations and how to pull them into Unity. There are other tutorials that show how to do this, but as this is for a class, I just want all these resources in one place. We're going to be doing this using the Piskel app. However, there are other tutorials out there for how to quickly create a sprite sheet in Photoshop. The basic gist of it is you want to create all of your sprites at a certain resolution. Typically, you want your sprites to be square in dimensions. That means generally either 32 by 32, 64 by 64, 128 by 128, or 256 by 256, etc. And that's because making it square just makes your life a lot easier when you're going on. In this app, this is a great free way to do pixel art. Obviously, if you want a different look and feel, Photoshop or Krita or one of those other digital painting tools is a really great other solution for doing these things. Now, if you can find tutorials for how to set things up so that once you've got your different frames drawn, then you can create a new image file and basically make it a multiple of the dimensions. You can even create grids, and then you can just drop them in there. And there's tutorials about that, so just search for whatever program you're using and how to make a sprite sheet, and that will happen. In Piskel, it's pretty simple. So this is Blobby, by the way. Blobby is a blob, and he's green. And this is his idle animation, right? So I basically created 6 frames of animation here. And when the player isn't doing anything, Blobby's just going to be panting, essentially. I have several other animated cycles here. This is Blobby's walk, right? He's a blob, so he sort of hops a little bit when he walks. Let me close that one. This is the jump animation. It's a little bit it's a little bit weird, but it works. There's, I believe somewhere in here, there's also an attack. Yeah, there's his attack, right? He launches out his tongue to smack people around. And so these are the different animated sequences that we've got, right? I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. And, potentially there could be a run or there could be a crouch or something like that. But just for the purpose of this tutorial, we're doing as few actions as possible. So let's go ahead and see how, at least from Piskel, we can go ahead and pull these out as sprite sheets. The way we do that is we go down to this icon here that says export. We click on it, and we have several options. We can do a GIF animation. We could do a zip file. We can do a PNG, or there's other options. And what we want to do is we want this sprite sheet file export. So I'm going to go ahead and click download. And I will call this Blobby Attack Sprite Sheet. Something like that. I'm not going to put it in my downloads, however. I will drop it into the folder that I'm working in. And I'm going to go ahead and just put it right in my assets folder. And I don't think I have a folder in here called sprites. So I'm going to go ahead and create a sprites or a sprite sheet folder. And that's just going to make it easier for me to find it. Unity doesn't really care. So I'm going to save that. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and do this to all of these. And you'll note, one thing to note is that I have scaled this up to 256 by 256, right? When I export it, I can scale up my things because these are 64 by 64 pixel things. So just make sure, if you want your artwork to be bigger, this is a really good place to do that. So this next section is going to be sped up in the tutorial. Okay, so once we have got our sprite sheets downloaded and dropped into our assets folder, we can go to sprite sheets. And you'll see I've changed one of these. There's a reason it's got that gray background there, and we'll talk about that in a second. But so what you need to do at this point to make this usable is we need to select these objects. Like, so I'm going to start with jump because I've already done this, and I'll need to do one more step on that. But what you want to do is you want to change the texture type from default to sprite. And then we need to change the sprite mode from single to multiple. Because right, what that's saying is we are going to want to slice this up. This isn't just one static image that we want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And you'll see that that automatically changes the background to a transparent background. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my sprite, this sprite sheet again. I'm going to make sure I still have that selected. And there's this Sprite Editor button over here in the inspector. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And when I do that, it brings up the Sprite Editor. And the Sprite Editor is going to allow me to chop this up into a grid. And the way that we do that is we click this slice button here. And by default, it should be set to automatic. We could do that, but that is a little nerve-wracking. We're going to do grid by cell count. And cell count basically is how many rows and columns are there. And so in this case, there are three columns and 4 rows, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say 3 by 4. I'm going to click slice. Now, when I do that, it has now chopped this all up into these different pieces. You can see they're even in size. They all should be 256 by 256. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply and make sure that that did what I wanted it to, and it looks like it did. So now I'm going to go ahead and just close the Sprite Editor. Now, once I've done that, you'll see there's a little arrow that pops up next to this, and if I click on it, you'll see that now what it's done is it's basically split this up into each one of these individual frames that I'm going to need in my animation. So let's go ahead and do that to all of our different sprite sheets. Now, one thing to note is I brought these all in as individual sprite sheets. One thing we could do is I could have done all of these animations as, all of these as frames in one big animation in Piskel, and then had all of those sprites in one panel. Or conversely, I could also bring these individual things into Photoshop and go through and combine them all into one solid image, and then make that a single sprite sheet, which would be more efficient in terms of optimization and resource use, because instead of having to open 3 or 4 images, it would just open one image and grab frames from that. So that's a more efficient way to do it. But to keep it simpler in terms of explaining things, I wanted to do it in multiple sheets. All right, let's do these other ones, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so the next step in this process is to take the sprite sheets that we've created and bring them into Unity, into our scene. So at this point, we've got several different sprite sheets, and we need to make them animation clips and do all of that. And then we would apply them to a player in the scene at some point. Now, at this point, there's something else you can do with sprite sheets, right? We're using these as a way to animate a scene, but you could also just use it as a way to store a whole bunch of assets in one place. So if you have several different block types that would be making up the background of your image, or maybe you have 12 different types of trees that you want to have scrolling past in the background, you can also just drag an individual frame up here and drop it in here, right? So if I had like 12 trees in here, I can just pull each one of those different varieties in as a static image. I'm going to go ahead and undo that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with, let's just start with the idle, because that's that's what makes the most sense. I'm just going to click and drag this into my scene. Now I don't have anything in here. I have absolutely no controls or anything. But what it's going to do is it says, oh, okay, well, I need to create a new animation. So we're going to call this blobby idle, because it's going to create this new animation clip for us. I'm going to click save. And once I've done that, if I just go ahead and hit play really quick, I believe this will automatically play, and if not, we will make sure that that animation works. Yes, right. So now Blobby is automatically playing, and you'll note that when I pulled this Blobby idle sheet in, it created it as an object, and it's created an animator that's attached to that. So his tongue's going in and out. It's fantastic. We're all happy about that. So how do I add these additional things? Well, what I need to do is I need to just go ahead, and to start with, I can just drag all of these different sheets in here. And we can have, the different, and then we can actually take the different animation clips and apply them to to the Blobby idle to the controller. So to start with, let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to pull attack in, right? Because then I can create, Blobby attack and save that. I can also, so I've done attack and idle. Let's do jump. And it looks like the last one we need to do is Blobby walk. Okay, so I've created all of these animations by dropping these in. If I was to play this, right, each one's going to be doing its own thing in a different location right now. Right, so you can see that I've got a whole bunch of different options here in terms of what's happening, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And what I'm going to do is say, okay, well, this is our idle, right? This is the one that I really want to use. And so I've got my idle selected, right? I know this is my controller. And so what I need to do is go to my Blobby idle controller, and I just need to go ahead and click open. And when I do that, right, it's going to open my animator window. And if I'm lucky, I can just go ahead and make that smaller. And you'll see, okay, so I've got Blobby idle. But now what I can do is I can just attach these other animation tracks to this. So I can pull in Blobby attack, I can pull in Blobby walk, and I can pull in Blobby jump. All right, so I've got all of those animation clips in here. And now what would need to happen is, right, I need to set up my animator to switch between these things. And there's several different ways I can do that. But to start with, let's just go ahead and have these transitions run through so we know that they're all working. So I'm going to say idle, let's say walk to jump to attack. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say make transition to walk. I'm going to say right click, make transition to jump, right click, make transition. And I'm not, oops, I missed one here. Make transition. There we go. And then I can go back as well. But at this point, I just want to make sure that this is working. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit smaller, and let's hit play. Because we want to watch and make sure that this center one is going through all of the animations. All right, so yeah, he's doing his attack over and over again because he doesn't cycle through, right? But he did run through all of these steps to get there. Okay, so if we go to our different transitions, you can see there's, an exit time, and, it's a fixed duration, right? We have no interruption short. There's a transition duration. We should be able to just set that to 0, right, for all of these if we wanted to, because we don't need to fade from one thing to the other. This is a frame animation where we just want it to hop to the next frame. We don't need any blending whatsoever. So we should just be able to see this, right, do its thing, okay? So let's go ahead and have this transition back. So I'm going to say make transition and just make transition. Oops, I missed one. So let's click here, make transition. Okay, so this should cycle through everything over and over and over again. And we'll see how this goes. Okay, so we've got, right, Blobby's doing all the different steps here. If I select my animator, I'm surprised I don't actually see it running through, but it should be doing everything. You can at least see him do the jiggle in the air and the attack there at the end. Awesome. Okay, so we've got all of these different animation clips on here, and then we would need to add behaviors to the, or we need to add, conditions for these transitions to occur. So let's go ahead, and we're not even going to have a player controller at this point. I just want to show you how to do it. You could obviously attach controls to this. We're just going to be, basically taking input in a bolt graph, and based on that input, we're going to set different conditions. Okay, welcome back. So in this segment of this tutorial, we're going to take all of these different animation states that we've created, and we're going to create a graph, and we're going to transition between them. I was experimenting with using bolt as a way to, and use the play option to switch between these. But without the transitions, honestly, trying to make bolt graphs to do that was aggravating. In code, I think it would be significantly easier and faster. But in terms of making a graph, it seemed like, at least for the number of different states I have here, it makes sense to have these all be transitions. Now, there's a point where if you have a boatload of different states, doing all the transitions is just a total nightmare. And so that might be a time when making a graph where you were doing, essentially choosing when you would switch between these different states might make more sense. But in this case, because there's so few states, I'm going to show you how to do it with transitions and how to set up transitions for sprite-based or frame-based animations rather than procedural animations, right? So with a lot of 3D stuff, with a walk cycle or whatever, there's, all of those points are smoothly transitioning from place to place, and the mesh is moving. In this case, right, we're just rapidly flipping from image to image to image, and so it's a slightly different case. But let's go ahead and look at how we integrate a graph with these things. Now, to start with, the one that I've been doing all the work on is the blobby, is this idle one here in the middle, I believe. If I turn that off, yeah, that is the one that I've been working on. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete these other ones because I'm not using these and they're just cluttering things up. So I'm just going to go ahead and select these three. Oops, I'm going to select these three. I'm just going to delete them from my hierarchy, and then I'm going to go ahead and select this. And you'll see that I just have the graph, that the animator graph that I'm interested in. Now, it's really small at this point, but that's fine. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and start controlling when we're going to do this. So I need to start being able to switch between these states. So before I do anything with a graph, which you can see down here, and now I'm getting errors because I've disappeared a bunch of stuff there. But what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we need to arrange our graph. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this over. And in arranging this graph, the things that we're really going to need to focus on. So in this graph, I have to think about all the different states and what needs to transition to what. So obviously, I need to be able to transition from my idle state to walk, to attack, and to jump. Now, additionally, right, I don't want to have to transition back to idle in order to jump, right? I'd like to be able to transition from walking to jumping and from jumping back to walking. I might also want to be able to transition from jumping to attacking or from attacking to jumping. And this could be potentially a little bit trickier, but we're going to go ahead and set this up. And then obviously I want to be able to stand still and jump as well. So let's start making these connections, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with idle, and I want to say, okay, what are all the states that I want to be able to transition to? So I'm going to say make transition. I'm going to come over here to walk. I'm going to click again. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say make transition, go down to jump, click. I'm going to come over here, right click, make transition, and go to attack. Right, so from idle, I want to be able to transition to those different states. From walk, and we're just going to go, I'm going to go clockwise around the circle. So from walk, I'm going to want to be able to transition to idle, right? I need to be able to make it back to that state. I also want to be able to transition to jump, right? And I want to be able to transition to attack. So I'm going to go ahead and make a transition straight across here. This is going to be something that looks really familiar, really similar to a lot of things you will make using the this. Now we could be using any state as well. I'm not going to in this case just because it's pretty simple, and it's going to show where there's a lot of challenges that are going to come up here that are going to be illuminated by having the graph set up like this. So so then let's go to jump, and so jump, right? I want to be able to transition to walk. I want to be able to transition from jump. Oops, not what I wanted to do. There we go. I want to be able to transition from jump to idle, and I want to be able to transition from a jump to an attack. All right, and so then the other direction, right? So attack, I want to be able to transition from attack to idle. I want to be able to transition from attack to walk. I want to be able to transition from attack to jump. Right, so now I've got this graph with all of these transitions set up. Now, if I hit play on this right now, unless I have this graph turned off, I'm going to get a lot of errors. But basically, right, you can kind of see that for whatever reason, it's choosing walk, and I'm not quite sure why, but it's just transitioning between those two. And that's because we've set up 0 conditions for these transitions to happen. And we don't have any other things stated about how we want this to act. So let's go ahead and start creating some conditions. So first, let's create, we'll create a walk condition, a jump condition, and an attack condition. And so to do that, we're just going to go up here to our parameters, and we're going to say bool, and this is going to be walk. And then I'm going to add another bool. I'm going to, surprisingly enough, call it jump. And I'm going to add another bool that I will, surprisingly enough, call attack. Okay. So now I need to apply these so that I can use them as transitions. And we have some complex behaviors here, right? Because, if I just want to transition to idle, all I care about is whether or not, from idle to walk, all I care about is whether or not walk is true. So let's select this transition. I'm going to come down here, and we're not going to mess with any of these settings yet, but we will soon. So I want to add a condition. So I hit the plus sign here. Oops, I hit it plus twice. So I'm going to try and select the second condition and remove that. So basically, if this walk condition becomes true, then I want to transition to walk from idle. All right. But if I want to transition from walk to jump, if I select this transition, what I need is in order for this to happen, I need walk to be true. So I want walk to be true. And then I also am going to need jump to be true. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm just going to say jump true. Okay. Now let's go ahead, and we're just going to go through this part of the graph, and then we're working our way back now. So I'm going to say, okay, well, from this jump, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to say, well, in order to transition to walk, I'm going to want walk to be true, but I'm going to want jump to then be false, right? So those are the conditions I'm testing for, right? And so those two, that should get me back to walk. Now, if I go back to walk and I'm saying, okay, well, what do I want to do to transition back to idle? Basically, right, I just want walk to be false. So I'm going to make walk false. Now, the other transitions here are similar. So if I go to idle and I want to transition to attack, then probably what I want to do is say, right, attack should be true, right? Similarly enough, this other one, if I'm transitioning back, right, we want attack to be false. So I'm just going to switch, oops, not jump, sorry, attack and false, right? So those two transitions have happened. And then if I want to go from attack to jump, right, if I want to transition that direction, well, first I'm going to want my attack to be true, right, because it has to be true if I'm in this state. And then I'm going to also want to add, right, jump is true. So I can be attacking and then jump, right? And if I'm transitioning back, I'm going to go ahead and add this and just say, attack needs to be true, add another condition, and jump needs to be false. Okay. And then the last transition we have are between walk and attack, and then idle and jump. So idle and jump is pretty simple. Let's go ahead and select those. So going from idle to jump, I'm going to go ahead and say, right, jump should be true, surprisingly enough. And going the other direction, I'm going to say jump should be false. Now, we're going to talk about why some of these may be problematic, but we're going to get our base set up, and then we're just going to go through and figure out what's going wrong or what's going right. Okay, so in this case, if I am walking and I want to do an attack, I could essentially, make it so you can't walk and attack, but that's not what we want. We want to be able to say, okay, walk should be true, and then obviously attack should be true, right? On the way back, we're going to say walk should be true, and then attack should be false. Okay, so I believe that we've gotten everything set up here now. So we've got these things. So if I'm running this at this point, I don't have any code set up whatsoever, right? There's no keys or no inputs going to change this. But you can see I'm doing my idle animation here. If I check mark walk, then I'm going to start walking. And if I check mark walk and jump, then I'm going to start jumping. But if I uncheck jump, right, then I'm walking again. If I check mark walk and attack, right, then I stop walking and I start attacking until I am, right, done attacking. And so similarly, I can go through and I can test, okay, let's see what happens if I turn walk off, right? I should go back to idle. If I go from idle to jump, there we go. Awesome. If I go to attack and then add jump in there as well, I should start jumping. And, this is a case where there might also have to be something where instead of it going to this jump, maybe there's a jump attack that's a different animation and than just the jump animation. But in our case, we're just going to pretend that, right, we're just keeping it simple. Hopefully these ideas then make sense as you go forward. And if I don't know if there's any other combos that we've got that need to be set, but right, so we've got those set up. That's great. So now let's go ahead and create a graph that's going to allow us to actually make those transitions happen. It's really pretty simple to do. And then once we do this, there's going to be some issues that will come up, and we will deal with those. So let's go ahead and create a flow machine. You'll know notice I already have one on here, but I'm going to go ahead and add a component, and I'm going to say bolt flow machine. And for me, because I have two, I'm just going to move this one up so it becomes the first thing that gets touched. Now, this would be something that might be good to do as a macro because there's a high likelihood that you will reuse some of this and not want to redo all the code that we're going to have to do this. So, and it shouldn't make a difference because the animator is an asset. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and create a new flow macro. In assets, I'm going to scroll down to scripts. And I'm just going to call this blobby animation control. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And then in my graph, what I need is I'm going to be splitting this up into different steps. So I'm going to have my update event, and then I'm going to be doing several different types of input. The first one is to get walk set up. And so what I want to do is I want to type in input dot get axis, and there we go. Pull this over, and we're going to get the horizontal axis. Now, something I want to do is I want to trigger walking, whether I'm walking right or left, right? And this outputs a value that's either -1, 0, or 1. So something that we can do to the value that's coming out here is we can check the absolute value, which if you loathe math, I'm sorry, but basically what absolute value does, if you don't remember from math classes in high school or whatever, is it basically takes away the negative sign. So whether it's -1 or 1, the output is 1. And so with that, we can basically use that as a quick way to make our logic a little bit simpler, because now I can just say, I can come over here and I can create a greater than. And so I can just say, if it's greater than 0, right, then we're going to want to do something. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create a branch. I'm going to connect my flow over here, right? And so now if this is greater than 0, right, then what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to set my walk value to true. Now, the way that that works, and I've talked about this before, is but you go ahead and you say the unit you want is animator.get and bool. And get bool, and the name that you want, right, in this case is walk. Right, that's that value we created. It is case sensitive, so be aware of that. So if it's true, we want to be able to, oops, we don't want to get the bool, we actually want to set the bool. So let me try that again. .set bool value, name, there we go, name and value. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. The name will still be walk, and then the value in this case is going to be true, so it's just a checkbox, and I'm going to connect that to the true. Now, if I let go and I'm not walking, I should be idle, right? So what I want to do is I want to copy this and paste it, and I want to set this value to false and connect that. Okay, so this should allow me to transition from idle to walk. Let's go ahead and check that out before we get any further along in our timeline. Oh. Okay, so I'm idling, and now I'm walking, and now I'm stopping. Now you'll note I let go of the, well, you may not notice this, but I let go of the key a little bit before it actually stopped walking. And that's one of the things we're going to have to figure out. So, right, I'm pressing the key, I let go. It still goes through a walk cycle before it transitions back to idle. So what's going on with that? Let's go ahead and fix that while we're here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my thing so that these changes definitely take effect. And I'm going to select my transition from walk back to idle. And right now, there's this setting that says has exit time. And what that means is that this is going to play through to the end of the clip, or to wherever, right, wherever we tell it to stop playing this thing, but it's going to force us to go through that entire animated cycle. What we want is we want to be able to just say wherever we are in our animation, we need to be able to jump back to idle as soon as the player lets off that key. So I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to uncheck has exit time. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this transition duration to 0. And the reason for that is because, let's go ahead and just do that, is because the walk cycle, right, these are just still images. So it doesn't make any sense to blend these two animations together. It's easier to just chop it right off where it needs to be. So I'm going to make those changes. The other thing is the idle animation. We also don't want that one to be continuing to play after we press the button, because then it makes it feel like the controls have a lot of lag in them. And we want to make sure that this is snappy for our player, unless you intentionally want them to feel like they're, you know, intoxicated or not able to accurately control their character. So I'm going to select the transition out of idle. I'm going to adjust this transition duration to 0, and I'm going to uncheck has exit time. Okay. So now if I go ahead and run this one more time, it should be a little bit snappier. And now there's some of these, like the attack, we're not going to want to do that on, and we'll see that in a second. But so now if I press walk, right, I start walking. As soon as I let off the button, he stops walking. If I press walk with the other direction and let off the button, as soon as that happens, you see he stops walking. Okay. So that's what we want to have happen. So before we do any more coding, let's just go ahead and make sure all the transitions from idle to the other two states match this, because we definitely want this to be able to set. So I'm going to take my transition duration, set that to 0. I'm going to uncheck has as exit time. And then going from blobby idle to jump, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set my transition to 0. and I'm going to uncheck has exit time. Okay, so I've made those changes, and we're probably going to need to make some more as we go. But let's go ahead and go back to our flow machine, and I'm going to double click. And there's what I need to do is I'm going to be splitting this up, right? So this is our horizontal movement. I'm going to go ahead and select my update, and maybe one or two of these bools over here. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. Okay, so instead of input get access, we want to get, when the button gets pressed down for fire or jump, that's when we want to be able to set the bool to true. So I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to say add unit, and I'm going to say input dot get button, and we want get button down. And let's start with jump. So I'm just going to type in, and it's capital JUMP is the name. Connect this over here. Now I'm going to get a true or false out of this. So I could probably actually just copy and paste this branch. Now, one of the things that we're going to want to do is we only want to connect the true branch on this, because otherwise, since this is connected to an update event, it's going to be sending falses continually, and that's going to kick us out except for the moment that we press the button down. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to then also basically do these same steps, except if I go ahead and, why don't I just copy all of these and paste this. And then if I right click here and say replace, I'm going to say input dot on, or sorry, get button up, right? So now in this case, right, if I get button down, then it's going to make it true, and then I just need to change this to false. So when I let my finger off the button, then the jump state should end. It should go back to being false. Now for firing, I'm going to do the same exact thing. So I'm just going to select both of these. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, one change before I do that. I still have these set to walk, so I want to make sure I change these to the appropriate name for the bool that we want to impact. So I'm going to change those to jump. Otherwise, everything I do is going to make it walk. And that's not what we want. Okay, so I'm going to copy these two. I'm going to paste them. I'm going to drag them down here. And now we just need to change the names on these. So this will be, it's capital F fire 1. And this will be capital F fire 1. And then I called this attack. So we'll just say attack. And if I can actually select that, attack. Okay, so now I've got probably everything that I need. I can go ahead and delete this and probably delete my start event as well. And let's go ahead and see what happens when we try and run through our animation. So first we should test and make sure walk still works, in case we made some mistake there. But all right, first, great, we're idling. Right, I can walk. If I hit spacebar, I can jump. And right, if I let go of the spacebar, I jump all the way through my jump, so it doesn't get cut off, which is what we want. If I hold down Control, which is fire 1, you can see the tongue extends. I should probably put a little animation here at the end. And you'll also note that it actually the attack goes all the way out to the end, right? And that's what I want. And so that's what, if I select one of these, if I select Blobby, it attacks transition to the transitioning to jump. And this is something, actually, let's do it from idle, because that's what we've been testing. So from idle, right, idle doesn't have an exit time, so it can exit whenever it gets an alert that another key has been pressed, another state needs to be entered. But on the way back, it has an exit time, which means that if I was to uncheck this and hit Control, and then come back in here and hit Control, you'll see that, right, that attack doesn't go all the way out. Depending on how long I hold Control down, right, I'm either going to get like the full thing or nothing. So, or just a little bit. And that can cause really strange behaviors. So I'm going to go ahead and check that again. So now let's try some of these states where we start walking and then we jump or attack. So, oh, I'm going to select in my game. And so I'm walking, and now I'm going to hit jump. And you can see that I'm walking and now I'm jumping. Something you might note is it took a second for me to go from walk to jump. So if I select that transition, you'll see I still have an exit time from walk to jump. So I'm going to go ahead and make a few changes here. Specifically, right, this still has that blended transition too. So I'm going to set my duration to 0, and I'm going to turn exit time off. And then, however, with jump, I want that full action to complete. So I'm going to leave this the same, except I'm going to set the duration of the transition to 0. And I think exit time of 0.75 will get the jump completed. And if not, we will set that to 1. And so the same thing is going to happen over here, but let's go ahead and test these out first. And between walk and attack. But let's go ahead and make sure our jump is working a little better now. Okay, so he's walking, I hit jump, and he jumps right away, right? There's no delay in that. Fantastic. Okay, so that's what I wanted. So now let's go ahead and stop this, and we're going to do the same thing with this attack. So on the way into the attack, I want to make sure that on exit time is turned off, and that I have my transition duration set to 0. Right, so it just goes immediately to the attack. So let's go ahead and see what happens. All right, so I'm walking, and I press the attack key. There we go. Press the attack key, and I do an attack. Right, that tongue moves out pretty slow. It's a pretty slow attack. You're going to have to do some planning in this game. But, right, so that works. And then on this way back, the only change we want to make is to come in here. Let's go ahead and stop this. So on the way back from attack, we want the attack to play out, and we don't need it to transition. So I'm just going to set 0 as my transition. Okay, so I've got those things set. Now let's go ahead and do our tests from going from attack to jump, because that's really the last one we need to worry about. So, right, I'm attacking, and then I jump. Oh, I don't think I can jump, actually, because for some reason Control and Space is telling me what kind of keyboard this is. So that's a hilarious error, which is really, really funny to me. So I'm not going to be able to test that very well. I'd have to change the jump key or figure out why that causes my keyboard to choose a keyboard. It's really a strange combo to have. So anyway, hopefully that works. I'll be able to test that later. But really, we want this to have a fixed time. The only changes we might want to make is, not fixed duration, setting our transition duration to 0 here, and again, setting our transition duration to 0 here. But both with jump and attack, we want that exit time. We want this to cycle all the way through. Okay, so I've made those changes, and who knows if that actually is going to look the way we want it to. Okay, but we've got all of our animation tracks set up. So we are at a really good spot. This code and these graphs, you could then, right, if you've already got a graph that's got the motion of your character in it and controls for that, these things could be integrated into that. They can also just be independent, or you could be setting a variable and then, having a separate section of your graph where all the animation takes place. But this is sort of the basis of how you do all of those steps. And these graphs can be very, very complex. You can have lots of different possible things. If there was a flying attack or a crouch or a crouching attack, right, you can imagine that these become more and more complex as you go.